Good afternoon, Caroline. So lovely to see you on such a cold, wintry day. How are you doing?
Well, personally, I'm doing fine. I mean, in my pessimistic modes, I say not dead yet, which always seems to be a good starting point. But it is a very beautiful sunny day out there, and so that lifts the spirits, doesn't it?
And I think going into this year, if I've got it correctly, your plans were that you were going to step away slightly from the Preservation Trust. But then,
indeed, I was. But when the pandemic came along, the trustees kindly asked me to stay on to steer the organisation through this year, and so I have. And actually, I would have hated to have stepped away,
yeah.
Earlier this year in the middle of it. So I'm sure there will come the moment. At some point in 2021 when I can resume that conversation. But at the moment, I'm still here.
But I think that's wonderful, because I think at the moment there's quite enough change being forced on people. If there's stuff that can remain constant whilst we're trying to go through this, I'm sure everyone's really delighted you've done that. So thank you on behalf of the City of Bath for your personal sacrifice in carrying on doing it. And how about the organisation and the team and steering it through this pandemic? What have been the big challenges for you?
Well, the biggest challenge was for our museum's operation to close on the 16th of March, and that's 90% of our income. And so we had to pretty rapidly take some pretty difficult decisions. And although obviously the furlough scheme came riding over the hill, and indeed we were able to open two of the museums in the summer eventually with the support of lottery funding that came through in July, it's been very tricky. And of course, what that means is that it's not just income lost immediately now, it's that we, like many other businesses or visitor attractions or whatever, anticipate only a very slow growth out of this as well. So very sadly, and we did have to lose some staff over the summer. And we went early, if you like, on restructure. And I think that was the right decision to make. But of course, it's extremely painful, first and foremost, for the individuals who find themselves at the sharp end of that, but also for the organisation as a whole. It's always sad to see colleagues leave. So we did that. Later on this autumn, we were successful then in getting money from the Cultural Recovery Fund. So really for the first time over the last month, we felt able to breathe slightly. And although this second lockdown was a sad shock to have to close the museum again, we're now in a position of being able to build for the future. And that's the most important thing to have in one's sights, I think, is how one builds out of this. And so we're supported now until the end of March by the Cultural Recovery Fund, not just for our costs, but also with some grant to invest in the future of the museums as well.
And if there are people watching this who wish to support in any way, what's the best thing they can do? Because obviously people who would otherwise volunteer, a lot of the volunteer activity, I'm guessing, is limited at the moment. I mean, is it as simple as money? What is it that
we have, in fact, if you walk past any of our museums now, you will see a very easy way to donate on a text for relatively small sums of money. If anyone would like to help us out with more than that, I think the best thing to do is contact me, and we'll leave an email address that you can contact me on at the end of this video. I should say that I've talked mostly about the museums, and I should say that the planning side of the organisation has carried on throughout. And we moved to working from home very rapidly, remarkably successfully, if I'm honest. Our regular monthly meetings with our volunteer advisors and helpers on that, professional advisors on the planning side, moved to Zoom very rapidly. We seem to have done that pretty effectively. We've done much more on our social media on the planning side, and we have seen a significant growth in our followers on the social media. And I'm delighted to say that we have won an award for the work we've done through COVID. Southwest RTPI award, that's the Royal Town Planning Institute award. We got the Special Chairs Award for how we'd put all of our work onto online working and so on during the pandemic.
That's brilliant. That is really, really brilliant. And one of the, I don't say one of the positives of the pandemic, because it's been so destructive in so many ways, But what are the things that you as an organisation have learned about how you work that you think you're going to keep going after the pandemic is not maybe consigned to history, but is slightly more controlled?
Well, I think for some areas of our work, home working has worked very well, but it is dependent on people having decent broadband and a bit of space. So my colleagues who I admire the most were the ones who in the first lockdown were putting in all their hours and homeschooling their children and looking after their house and, you know, doing it all from the kitchen table. Several of us worked silly hours at the beginning of the pandemic, and certainly in the month before Easter, there wasn't a day of the week I hadn't worked, and I don't think there were many days of the week where I hadn't worked till 10 o'clock at night, in part to allow those with kids to log on at sort of 5 o'clock in the afternoon and work till midnight. So people in that situation, I think, were doing magnificently to manage to turn the handle and get the work done, actually.
So many people have stepped up, haven't they? So many people in so many different ways are doing things in a different way. And I'm with you. You know, the lockdown for me, there was things that were negative, but I wasn't trying to juggle a family at home with a full-time job, with a voluntary job on top of that. And people have managed, and technology, when used correctly, is a wonderful thing. Though I don't know if you find the same. I find doing very long Zoom meetings actually slightly more tiring than doing physical meetings.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I'm sitting here with my new glasses, which are specifically glasses for looking at a screen. They're at screen distance, because I was finding I was getting headaches and things like that. And they plus a decently sized screen rather than just the laptop screen have worked wonders, actually. It took the headaches away, which is the most important thing.
I think I know what I might ask Father Christmas for my Christmas present.
Yeah. And the other I think the other thing on you're saying, what's the silver lining in all of this, is that I think it will create accelerated change in all sorts of areas. Mm-hmm. Certainly, it's forcing us to review how our museums operate. As we look to come out in 2021, we will be changing how we present the museums. We will be introducing more different technologies into how we present the museums as well. And so I think in all areas of all sorts of people's life, whether it's doing more of their shopping online or whatever it is, or as we know, hardly any cash being used anywhere.
So with this move online, have you found that you've been maybe reaching people who you otherwise wouldn't have reached? So is there a bit of a silver lining, as you said, in some of these things?
Well, I think there's great potential to reach further than you normally do. And we had an event for members, an online event for members. And there was a lady there who'd been a member of Bath Preservation Trust for 47 years, but she'd never been to the AGM. Wow. And there she was, popped up and said, how delighted she was to be there and how lovely to be able to sort of chat to us on the chat function and so on. And I got her to have a sort of life story out of her afterwards. And she'd lived in Bath when she was young. And I think either where her husband proposed to her, or I should have looked up the story beforehand, but it was really when she was very young and they had such happy memories of Bath. That's why they got involved with the trust. And it was around the time of the sack of Bath and so on. So there was lots of campaigning to do at that time. And there she was, still there. So, and of course, once you get the idea that you can reach out to people way beyond your normal boundaries with something like that, there may be people in the States or all over the place who'd be interested in things to do with Bath. Yeah. And then the other thing we became aware of was that with education work, obviously, there were lots of people who were very concerned about what they were going to do with their homeschooled children. And we like others, leapt into that space and produced some worksheets and things like that for kids to do. But of course, at the most disadvantaged end, kids don't necessarily have access to the computers to get that work, or don't want to have to pay the exorbitant prices we all pay for printer ink to print lots of sheets off. And so just last week, actually, we've been putting out activity packs through the children's centres and food banks, which are physical activity packs for children with paints and glue and worksheets and things like that. So we hope that'll get to kids for the summer holidays, or for those children who are, and we're hearing more about year groups not being at school because of COVID cases. So having something in their hands to do at home. So I hope that gets to the right places and gives some fun for kids in the next month or so.
That's such a brilliant initiative, because there are, I suppose it's almost Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There is that thing about, first of all, we have to keep people safe and warm and fed. But once we've done that, there does need to be some mental stimulation. You know, we are by nature social animals, and we're animals that enjoy learning and enjoy exploring. So I think that's a fantastic, and to do it via places like the food bank, so people are going there anyway, not trying to create another channel, I think it's inspired.
Well, we're delighted to have made those links and those partnerships, actually, and hope that we can carry on doing so into the future.
You know, it's been one of the things that has struck me in all the conversations I've had. One of the absolute common factors that everyone has said is that, you know, people knew of other organisations, but they'd actually formed much deeper and closer links, because a lot of the stuff that's had to be delivered, you know, some of it's been the council, some of it's been the voluntary sector, some of it's been the private sector, you know, some's the heritage sector, the charity sector, all these different sectors have had to, in order to be most efficient, work together. And to my mind, that is one of the key things that's come out of the pandemic as a good outcome from a bad thing.
Yeah, long may that last. I mean, I think Bath was getting better at that.
Yes.
I mean, the truism is that we're all in our little silos, but actually, as a museums sector in Bath, we talk to each other much more now than we did 10 years ago. And I think there are other partnerships with, I don't know, with the National Trust or with Bathscape and so on, where organisations are talking to each other and finding out what each other is up to in advance of going ahead. And there will always be bits that fall through the cracks, but I hope that will persist.
So do I. And one of the areas, I don't know if you know, when I first became mayor in June, you get a year as being mayor, and my theme was about combating loneliness. And I actually chose that before the pandemic was even heard of. So it's actually become sort of more key now. And one of the things with my other hat on, with my councillor hat on, we're working with some of the local doctors around social prescribing. So for people, there's sometimes people who aren't ill, but there's an absence of being well. So places like Bathscape, or, you know, around Sydney Gardens near where I live, or you know, the Holborn, or anything that's a Bath Preservation Trust museum, or even the council museums, we could get to a stage where it is perceived that it's for people's mental good to be able to get involved as well. And I think that's another positive.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges for everyone at this time has been the physical distancing that's required. I think social distancing is the wrong word, actually, because it's physical distancing that people have been unable to have, and physical contact and physical proximity to either things or mostly people. And so I think while that still carries on, we have to find other routes of contacting. I mean, I was very fortunate in first lockdown. We had my stepson and his wife and their 2-year-old staying with us, and my son and his girlfriend back from university. So we were quite a jolly household of 7 of us. And although occasionally that meant fighting for broadband, on the whole, we managed it, and it meant we had some jolly company through the harder days of that. And it made me really appreciate that how difficult it either was for colleagues of mine who live on their own, or for other people not to do with work who live on their own, who are deprived of that sort of day-to-day social interaction that sometimes work can give, and that and the workplace can give. And of course, we've still got a few months of the majority of work taking place at home. Although obviously, fortunately, since we're in tier 2, we will be able to open up some activities in the months going forward.
No, you're absolutely right. I live on my own, and I found myself probably oversharing with my food delivery person because they're the only person I'd seen physically for a long time. You know, I got Zoom calls with people I love, and they love me, and that's lovely. But, you know, I haven't actually physically touched anybody or given them a hug since March. And I don't consider myself to be a particularly tactile person, but I am really missing it. Really, and what is lovely, if you go for your, you know, daily allocated exercise and you walk through a park, people are much better at making ordinary human eye contact and saying morning, or
I agree with that.
Dogs. You know, you have a conversation with a dog, and that's lovely.
I live on the outskirts of Bradford-on-Avon, and I know every inch of my lanes, the back lanes, that you know, before I'd just go down one of them, but we did a number of sort of exercise challenges across the family. So I know every 5K route around where I live, virtually every plant on every 5K route, because we've done it so many times. And it's been lovely. And as you say, especially in the first lockdown when the weather was glorious and you saw families out together, and in a way that you never did normally, you know, seeing whole families out together, mum and dad during the day and so on. There were some magical positive moments, as well as all of the negative challenges as well. And I hope we do hang on to our memories of those. Yeah. And the one thing I think I share your view that new normal has become a cliche, but I do hope that we don't all just revert to old bad habits. And there was good to come out of it, and we all know how beautiful Bath was when it was empty. I know we all like it to bustle as well, and maybe we'll even be seeing, you know, rugby shirts and all the rest bustling around the city over the next few weeks, which will be very different. But equally, it was an opportunity to see streets without cars for the first time in their history, really, well, without vehicles in their history.
It was very spooky. It was very, I live quite close to the centre of Bath, and I'd walk through it, and it felt terribly, terribly, terribly weird.
I only saw it on photographs from colleagues, but yeah.
It was weird. Can I just close by saying, on behalf of the City of Bath, how much the Preservation Trust is appreciated.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you. We're pleased to hear it. But
I occasionally, or in the past when we could do it, I would go on walks with the Mayor's Guides. You know, they do the guides walks around it, and sometimes as an icebreaker, a Mayor's Guide would say, "Why have you come to Bath? And where are you from?" And it helped. And without exception, people talked about the heritage or the architecture. I mean, occasionally they'd also say maybe rugby, maybe shopping, maybe, you know, we've got a good food offer or whatever, but 99% of it was, some of them had a bucket list of all the World Heritage sites, and they were just working through.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah.
So it is of, you know, we want to be a thriving, forward-looking city that moves with the times, but the fact that we've got this heritage is one of our unique selling points, and you are one of the guardians of that. So it really very much is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.